Today, we're going to discuss the importance of adaptive leadership and systems thinking. These are two concepts that go directly to how we work, what we do, who we engage with, and how we solve some of the most perplexing, challenging, and complex problems we face today. A systematic, strategic approach also helps us discovering change opportunities. So here's a question. How do you boil a lobster? The answer: put them in cold water and then start to slowly turn up the heat over time. Making slow, subtle changes over time can have a major impact, but turning up the heat also involves crucial conversations and productive conflict to increase our creativity, innovation, and ability to tackle complex and challenging problems in our teams, organizations, and even society. That is what adaptive leadership and systems thinking is all about. That emerge from our current environment, a world that is volatile, uncertain, turbulent, and changing rapidly. Adaptive leadership, defined by Heifetz and others, are the practice of mobilizing people and organizations to tackle tough challenges and thrive. I want to draw your attention to the idea of building new capacity. Some people say that the glass is half full. Some say it's half empty. But what about a whole new glass? One that actually includes a new way of drinking, like built-in straws. That's the concept of capacity expansion. Adaptive leaders don't worry about the past or use it as a baseline, although they are very well attuned to what the past is. They ultimately see the need for a whole new level, a new direction, a new vision. They are inclusive and look to allied fields, adjacent skills, and creative problem solving and finding to ensure the organization or team is well positioned for the future. Technical problems can be solved with knowledge that is available in an organization through the exercise of authority or expertise, or through the resources at hand. As this chart notes, which is from the book by Ron Heifetz and colleagues, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership, technical challenges are fairly clear-cut. However, many problems are both technical and adaptive. Adaptive challenges have no quick fix. In fact, even trying to define the problem itself can be very difficult. These require something beyond what is at hand to address the issue, often review of values and practices, loss of some previously held position, reality, or sense of identity, and innovation. This requires working with a wide array of people, including some who have very fervent disagreements. It also requires us to expand our capacity. It's a new, fresh, and innovative approach that can only be identified and solved by bringing people together. Heifetz has outlined 10 principles of adaptive issues. First, we must increase our own repertoire of the tools that we as leaders use. This requires reflection, training, experience, and more reflection. We must also remember, as we'll discuss shortly, that organizations are part of a larger system and depend on others. Here, the context is very important, as it requires us to adapt to the local culture and environments. There is a risk element that leaders must address. They must be both conservative in nature and also be innovative. Balance is important. He also discusses that people who are closest to the issue often have the most to lose in changing, but also likely have some or all of the elements of the solution. Once again, balance is very important here too, since we need and shouldn't alienate those people. especially when they possess both the problem and the solution. There's very little new under the sun, and adaptive solutions can be found. In fact, they may be used elsewhere successfully, or they may have failed elsewhere, but could work for your context. Heifetz encourages the use of small experiments to test change. It encourages innovation and testing, as well as modification and application. Without experimentation, we can't try, and without trying, we will fail. Leaders must address the issue of fear and loss, which is one of the most significant drivers of resistance to change. Loss of power, prestige, or purpose, and even the perception of loss, can be powerful emotional barriers that leaders must overcome. Reflection and dialogue are good ways to deal with these concerns. Being open, honest, and realistic is helpful. Acknowledging that losses will occur can set the stage that change happens and generates an imbalance for a longer period of time, but eventually will settle. It won't look the same, but helping everyone get there is a useful way to approach it. Adaptive leadership model is a leadership model that is based on three recurring frames or phases: assessment or diagnosis through data collection and review, small or experimental actions called interventions, and evaluation of the intervention and adjustments to the intervention. This begins the cycle all over again, with collecting data on the adjusted intervention and then additional small or experimental actions. The first and important piece is to gain some altitude. Heifetz and his colleagues call this going to the balcony. The idea is to gain some distance and perspective of the larger context and environment. Next, we diagnose the situation. Just like medical professionals looked at symptoms, they also gather lots of other data through tests, observations, interviews, and other sources to interpret the issue. Finally, we intervene. These can be quick-hitting, small experiments that enable us to look at the ability to make change. If they work, we can continue to scale or continue them. If they don't, we can try a new experiment or adjustment. The idea is that the cycle continues consistently as you move towards the ultimate vision, adapting and evolving along the way. This is the adaptive leadership roadmap that I created, drawing upon the key issues in the book by Ron Heifetz and his two colleagues. It reminds us that the observe, interpret, intervene model is all about connecting with people, finding a common purpose, and helping others define, clarify, focus, and adjust. Leadership needs teams. Don't try to do adaptive leadership on your own. Build coalitions. Get people's buy-in and identify their needs and concerns. Setting expectations early and often are critical. Expect to make course corrections and adjustments. After all, that is what learning is needed for adaptive challenges, as we saw in the chart previously. Adaptive leadership is often an issue seen in entrenched work cultures, where the status quo is not only accepted but rewarded, although all the external signs clearly point to the need for change. People are afraid to rock the boat and stand up courageously for the needed change. Other times, it is because those in leadership positions are fearful of their loss of status and well-being, and thus won't admit defeat. This often occurs in work situations where winning is the paramount theme, usually at the expense of someone else, often termed the enemy. The entrenched nature of the organization belies the greater challenge: people. These 8 tools are important for leaders to utilize over and over. The alignment challenges, fears, uncertainty, and other self-interest issues become the landscape of trial, assessment, data collection, persuasion, and evaluation. Culture plays such a significant role. Being culturally aware and understanding the unwritten rules, norms, and behaviors of an organization is essential in any context, but especially in the adaptive leadership context. These things say so much about how we operate, who is in, and how things really get done. Next, we will discuss systems thinking, an important component of adaptive leadership. Closely related to adaptive leadership is the concept of systems thinking. Peter Senge, author of The Fifth Discipline, and another leader in the field of adaptive leadership and learning organizations, defines systems thinking as a discipline for seeing wholes and a framework for seeing interrelationships rather than just things, for seeing patterns of change rather than static snapshots. Let's listen to how Senge himself describes systems thinking in a way we can all understand.
Well, the term systems thinking is really a mixed bag, and I use it very, very cautiously. First, both words are problematic, but the word system is the most problematic because if you say the word system, the picture or image that pops up into most people's head is computer system. Like, we need a systems expert here because our system's not working. The second most common association is management control system, as it's not my fault, it's the stupid system, right? So these are the two associations that come first to people, and neither of them is what we're trying to help people understand. So whenever I'm trying to help people understand what this word system means, I usually start off by saying, are you part of a family? Everybody is a part of family. Have you ever been seen in a family people producing consequences in the family, how people act, how people feel, that aren't what anybody intends? Yep. How does that happen? Well, then people can tell their stories and think about it, but that then grounds people in not the jargon, system or systems thinking, but the reality that we live in webs of interdependence. A family is a fairly close-knit one. You can kind of see most all the key players. But still, even though we can identify maybe on a list of 10 or 15 names, here's all the key people in my immediate family, still the complexity of interactions amongst all those people is obviously such that consistently families produce outcomes that nobody wants, which is the other kind of, you might say, fundamental rationale for all of this. It's not to, quote, understand systems. That's an abstraction. It's to understand how it is that the problems that are the most vexing and difficult and intransigent that we all deal with come about. And obviously, to get a perspective on those problems that gives us some leverage and some insight as to what we might do differently.
As Senge mentioned, systems thinking is like trying to figure out family dynamics. Who's who? What's what? Where are the hidden loyalties, scuffles, animosities? Where they are. Where things go right and where they go wrong. But they're all interrelated and rely or influence, directly or indirectly, on each other. Thinking of our organizations, teams, or ourselves as systems is critical to the understanding of how we all work together. Developing your systems thinking skills is just like everything else. You need practice. This diagram from the systemsthinker.com identifies 7 skills that can be useful. As you can see, the systems thinking process is very similar to the concepts of adaptive leadership. It's an iterative process, meaning that it always evolves and is repeated over time with small adjustments. This chart from the same page on systemsthinker.com describes what each skill means and how you can practice it. Dynamic thinking is looking for patterns. Using a role or position-based review of the systems can also help identify points that can be improved. Forest thinking is like going out onto the balcony to see the bigger picture. Operational thinking is looking at the process and figuring out how things actually work, not just how they should work. Closed-loop thinking goes beyond the one-time thing and tries to see everything as an ongoing process. Quantitative thinking is about looking for quantifiable items or ideas, even if they can't currently or aren't easily measured. Scientific thinking looks at experiments and testing to identify best practices and outcomes. As you can see, these are very similar to adaptive leadership, and they can work together very nicely. The goal is not to focus on one of these, but rather using multiple skills. So how can we enhance our ability to be systems thinkers? This infographic from the Waters Foundation for Systems Thinking is another useful tool to understand the ways that we can become more intentional about becoming a systems thinker. One of the most important is to surface and test assumptions. This is one critical element that we often neglect. Sengi's book tells us that to, quote, suspend one's suspensions means to hold them, as it were, hanging out in front of you, constantly accessible to questioning and observation. It means being aware of our assumptions and holding them up for examination, unquote. Leverage points are key to the systems thinking mentality. These are points that we can use to make significant changes and are often small points that are overlooked. Sengi defines leverage as seeing where actional and changes in structures can lead to significant, enduring improvements. Small, well-focused efforts often produce massive changes. watercenterst.org has other useful tools and resources as well that you can explore. Mind mapping is a systems thinking tool. It's a way to organize and visually showcase the system as a whole, thus enabling better discussions and options. Understanding the structure, the norms, and the underlying beliefs and assumptions are key, and mind mapping can help us with this. Since we often think visually, this can be very useful in bringing to surface some of those unsaid issues or assumptions that need to be addressed. Mind maps are charts and diagrams that visually display information which show concepts and relationships. At the center starts with the main idea, and then related or parts of concepts or ideas then radiate out from the main topic on branches. Additional associations can then be added to those branches. More remote details or associations move farther away to the edges of the map. According to the University of Oregon, mind mapping is a helpful way to be creative, plan, and organize. These graphical representations can be useful to brainstorm, and maps allow the generation of new ideas very rapidly. In planning, the maps can identify relevant information in a place that makes sense. to organize ideas, policies, or process in a useful and coherent manner. Mind maps are useful to organize that information. And because they're visual and we are visual people, it can be easier to remember and record. You can make mind maps on paper or using basic software. You can see the adaptive leadership, which is one of the examples of the mind maps that I created, as a way that was done on just simply Microsoft Publisher. So give it a try and enjoy. That I created for a presentation on the idea of skillful discussion. That is the central idea of the map. The idea is to broaden the focus of and improve our conversations, especially within teams. As you can see, there are shoots off that central topic, such as intent and skills, which are important and take up the majority of the page. The use of color can be helpful, as well as bullets, circles, and boxes. I did this one in about 20 minutes with very little planning, so it just goes to show you how easy they can be. Of course, the more you do, the better you get. Using mind maps as will be a way to help enhance our ability to be systems thinkers and encourage adaptive leadership. Thanks for watching. I hope that this video has been useful and enjoyable as we discussed adaptive leadership, systems thinking, and mind mapping. Overall, adaptive leadership is an excellent model for use in varying situations, but it's not perfect. And as others have noted, leadership can be very difficult and not a walk in the park. But having a useful model and tools we discussed makes it more useful in practice. It just adds more tools to our leadership toolbox. So good luck and enjoy practicing your adaptive leadership and systems thinking skills.